Going to enjoy this piece here on Warchant TV. Lots of good news to report, as one might imagine, given Florida State's successes in 2022. Alongside the founder and administrator of Warchant.com, he is Gene Williams. My name is Tom Lang. And so it is, Gene. You have reviewed Florida State statistically and also through PFF grades from 2021 to 2022 on the football field. I got to imagine, Gene, a lot of positives to take away year over year.
Yeah, there definitely is. We know how much better they did, obviously, on the field, getting to 10 wins this past season. But I always like to go statistically. Did the stats back that up? Where did Florida State have the biggest improvements to help that win total go up there? And where do they still need to maybe improve on? So what I like to do is not only the PFF stuff, because I've been doing those all season per game, is to look the improvements there, but also the traditional stats that I grew up with, the total offense, scoring, defense, all those kind of things too, because it's fun to kind of compare. And I think it's interesting to know as we've got more advanced in analytics and looking at things from people like PFF. I think we're going to get to that a little bit. It'll show some interesting things that don't necessarily match up with the NCAA stats. And I think there's some good reasons for that.
Good insights when you go back and forth between those. And Gene, I always enjoy how there's a point every season where we get lost in the weeds. And then sometimes dialing it back and taking a look at the overview is actually a healthy thing to do. Wait a minute, what's the big picture here? The big records, the points allowed, things like that, because results do matter. Process, analytics helps you with process, but results do matter. And in that ilk, we'll start with the big stats, the NCAA stats. We'll put up these graphics. You put together this particular chart for the members and the viewers over at warchant.com. Full story and a full breakdown, Gene, but let's go over some observations you have from Florida State's improvements from 21 to 22 in the NCAA stat book.
Yeah, these are the kind of the major categories that a lot of people look at per the NCAA, the various statistical categories. So I wanted to break those down. I mean, and they back up exactly what you might think, that this was a dramatically improved team. And you look at some of those numbers. I mean, she's going from number 80 in total offense to 10. I mean, that's dramatic. You're scoring. I mean, what, another 8 points or whatever per game, 8+ points. I mean, even defense, you had dramatic improvements there. And this is one of the ones we're going to get to in a little of the PFF, how they don't agree. And I think there's some good reasons for that. And some of these numbers really blow you away. And the one thing I want to get into you, Tom, to talk about this, but the biggest one on there, and by far the largest improvement of any team in the nation, and that is the third down conversion percentage, which was absolutely abysmal in 2021. But at number 4, from 105 to 4, I mean, that just doesn't happen. Teams don't improve that much in a category. It's so out there. I think, and I'm going to get your take, but one of the things that I'm actually writing, I'll do some follow-ups on the individual players, or I should say the individual segments, quarterback, running back, and so on. And the thing that really struck me, and I think it goes to this stat, is that Jordan Travis took 2 less sacks per game.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, that's a lot. That's a lot of sacks. He's taking less per game. So when you're not behind the sticks as often, it's easier. It means your third downs are a lot shorter than a 3rd and 8. Maybe it's a 3rd and 2 or 3, which is a lot more easy to convert, obviously. And I think his decision-making and not making those sacks, having better talent to receiver position, guys are open to make those conversions. I think all those things played into that dramatic improvement. But I'm always curious. You're really good in this analytics stuff and getting a good look at the team, Tom. So I'm curious your take on this.
Yeah, the first thing I think of when I see that improvement, without looking at this specific statistic that I'm going to point to, Gene, is average third down distance. How far are they on average away from gaining a first down? And are you in a position, at least third and medium, if not third and short? But let's say if it's 3rd and 4, you could call anything you want. And Mike Norvell is aggressive on 4th down as well. So just as a defensive coordinator, you've got to play it honest at 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5. So that's one thing I would look at relative to the yard to gain. How much shorter of a distance did Florida State have to achieve on 3rd down? And then also, the eye test and what we saw, your receivers were better. The offensive line, I think, was better year over year. Your running back core was better too. Trey Benson, by the end of the year, took it to another level, but Trayshawn Ward was nothing to sneeze at. And then Jordan Travis improved. Jordan Travis was more accurate. He was more decisive. He was better against the blitz. So if you wanted to bring a 3rd down pressure, Jordan had a good idea of where to go with the football. Gene, it was a collection of a lot of things conspiring at once. Florida State was, I think, let's put that stat back up there. They were 105th the year prior. It's hard not to improve from 105th, but to
Well,
get
not to fourth. Maybe you go to from 105th to 50, but to four, I mean,
but to
that's
get to the
nuts.
elite level, yeah, it's
Yeah,
all those things adding up. You're winning on first and second down more. How many times last year, Gene, did we lament that FSU would rack up a ton of yards on the ground, but it was through 3 or 4 explosive plays? It wasn't through
yeah.
consistent success on first and second. They got way better in that regard this year. So that's my take. Is I think that the improvement was on first and
It's
second.
also some situational stuff, and I remember going and talking. The first coach who really got, I think, heavy into this at FSU was Jimbo Fisher about situational stuff and playing these goal line, these third down stuff, coming up with. I mean, that you need to be at your best at those. So if you do well, like you said, you can get a bunch of yards, but if you're not scoring, you're not converting third downs. At the end of the day, that's going to hurt you in the scoreboard and it's going to hurt you in the win column too. So I think that's something they were much better. I thought, especially in the second half of the season in terms of the play calling, Jordan's decision making, everything else was there. But I think a lot of that's because they emphasized that practice.
And let's take a look briefly at the NCAA stats on defense, Gene, because there
Hmm.
is one category that got worse, which is
Yeah,
rushing defense, which is surprising. We all know some of the reasons why. Health has a lot to do with it, but that's interesting that they dropped 20 places,
yeah.
up about a dozen more yards per game. But the other categories look shine favorably upon Florida State. So how do you make sense of that particular comparison from 2 years ago to last season?
Yeah, I want to talk about really because PFF is going to paint a different picture on that a little bit. To me, look, I think really what this goes down to, and that rushing defense thing. Look at the 3 games they lost. Teams rush really well. Look at those last 2 games against Florida and against Oklahoma. Man, they gave up a buttload of yards on the ground. They were. I think that interior, the defensive line, Lovett was either out or he was limited down the stretch, and they just didn't have a whole lot of depth behind him. And I think that really hurt there, which is something I think we can talk down here a little bit. I think they'll be much better there. That'll help there. But I really think we'll get into this the PFF part. But to me, look at the games this year, Tom. Florida State won 5 blowout games. So what that means is they got way up on these teams. And when you're playing, especially an average to a mediocre type team, and you get a big lead and they have to go one dimensional, that defense has a huge advantage. Last year, one game, that Massachusetts game, every other game was close.
Yeah.
So that defense had to play it straight up. So the offenses had the advantage, or at least were not at a disadvantage. I think those games in the Syracuse and the Miami games, and you got way up on them, and they were in desperation mode. FSU's defense did well. So, I mean, really, in the PFF's going to show, I don't really know if the defense was any better. And I hate to give those Adam Fuller detractors a little extra fuel to the fire, but I don't really think it improved. At least according to PFF, it did not.
So let's take a look at some of those PFF numbers. Before we get there, you see at the top of the screen here, do us a favor, everybody, hit the like button underneath the video, subscribe to Warchant TV. It's absolutely free. These insights, though, they take time, and we appreciate Gene's hard work. So now to the PFF side of the equation. Gene, where do you want to begin? Because, again, if you look at that improvement column, there are a few more minuses, but some improvements that are just massive. Gene,
Yeah.
there's only 120 odd teams in this division of football. And I see at the bottom, for example, special teams, 96 places of improvement.
Yes.
Just incredible. Your thoughts on the overview here?
Well, I'm glad you brought up special teams because, I mean, how soon we forget how abysmal special teams are. They didn't seem great to me, and I don't really understand really how PFF weights it. I guess they're not maybe putting as much weight on field goals. I mean, that'd be the one thing I'd look that was not great, obviously, at certain times this past season. Old Fitzy struggled at times, but, they were competent in the return game. They weren't having penalties. They weren't muffing as many plays. So, I mean, they were better there. But I think you got to start here with offense. Again, it backs up here's where the NCAA stats and PFF are in harmony here. Dramatic improvements going from 96 in offense to 7. I mean, almost 90 spots on offense, and teams just don't usually get that much better in one spot because a lot of things have to happen. I think this is a function of the portal. When you can get guys that can suddenly come in, you don't have to develop them over a period of years. They're established. They come in, you get the Johnny Wilsons, the Parsons, the Trey Bensons, guys like that, these studs who can come in right away and make an instant impact. That really helps the offense. So to me, all the offensive categories, receiving again, 95-6. Again, going to the portal, the main guys you have are coming in are guys that came in the portal to help you. And it also helped, I think you saw dramatic improvements in your quarterback as well. Obviously, the last thing I want to talk about on offense, Tom, again, I want to get your input on this. The pass blocking, not as well, which is amazing to me. It speaks volumes that the passing could improve by that much, but yet the pass blocking theoretically maybe got slightly worse. I don't know. Again, I guess that's a credit to Jordan Travis. It's a credit to the receivers, to Mike Norvell and the play callers on that side of the ball.
Yeah, one of the limiting factors I'd say, just in general, this doesn't happen as much in the NCAA stats as it does Pro Football Focus. One of their weaknesses is they weigh every single game exactly the same. So
Hmm.
if you're going to have a season grade, that season grade will look at, from 2021's examples, UMass the same way they would look at Florida. And
Hmm.
that presents a bit of an issue to me. I'm wondering if some of the pass blocking stats, Gene, are influenced by garbage time, and maybe the backups are in and Tate's out there playing, and maybe that's going to affect their grades just a little bit more than in truth. Because I felt like in the flow of the season, outside of the Louisville game, where Robert Scott goes down and Tate's in there in the second half, and he did take a couple of big hits. He made a couple of huge throws too to go along with it. I mean, they were fine. If I can use that word with Florida State's offense, I don't walk away from the 2022 season having consumed the whole thing and say they were a lot worse in pass pro.
Hmm.
I don't get that sense. Maybe it's because Jordan Travis is the great eraser. They're giving Jordan more credit because he'll flush the pocket. You don't actually see him come down, but that counts as a pressure against.
Yeah.
It could be something along those lines. There's no doubt, though, Gene, that the offensive line, if we're projecting forward, can get better across the board. I just didn't think that, if you were listing Achilles heels for the offense, you'd say pass pro. Like, I would have said short yardage run blocking would have been the number one place I
Yeah.
go, not necessarily pass protection. So I mean, I'm sure there are some, advanced looks into it, but I wonder if sometimes garbage time, because Florida State was in garbage time an awful lot this season for good reason. They were blowing a lot of teams out. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, here at the end of the day, Jordan took half as many sacks per game.
Yep. Right.
So it's hard for me to put that in. I just don't really, and I think he has a better awareness. He wasn't holding on to the ball as long, and obviously it's a lot easier when a guy's getting open versus last year when the receiving core couldn't get open. But yeah, I take that with a little bit of grain of salt. I think it's fair to say it's probably about the same, and I think there's just enough variation in some of the factors we both mentioned to kind of maybe made it show up as a negative. But I really don't think it is. But to your point, I think this emphasizes some of the areas where Florida State can improve. So I don't know if you want to transition now to
Sure.
the area that is maybe not looking as good as the NCAA stats.
Yeah. Once again, the defense, if you look at the improvement column on the NCAA look, a lot of positive values. There's only one negative value for Florida State, and that was on the run defense side of the operation. For Pro Football Focus, overall defense trended backwards, run defense, tackling grade. Those are the three categories on defense where things did not improve. However, pass rush improved 3 spots, even though their grade was an identical
Yeah.
81.1. That I also find kind of curious, Gene, just because we remember what Jermaine Johnson and Keir Thomas did the season prior. PFF said their pass rush was about equal year over year, which before the season started, you would have taken that
Yeah.
all
Oh,
day.
100%.
But yes, let's take a look at these big three categories. Overall grade down 9 spots, run defense down 21, and tackling 27. To me, Gene, first off, tackling seems obvious. It felt like they tackled a
Yeah.
little bit worse this year, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think this is where PFF shows us something that really the NCAA stats don't. Like I said, I think the NCAA stats were artificially inflated because Florida State, several of those games, like you mentioned, they judge all the games the same. Well, when you're blowing out a team by 30, 40 points in the second half, I mean, they got to throw the ball around. It gives the defense a huge advantage. So the overall numbers might look better, but if you're grading it and you really look at it, you can go, well, maybe the pass rush wasn't as great in the second half when they were having to throw every single down and you could just tee off on them. So I think that artificially inflated some of the NCAA stats. But again, this is an area to me. Look, they're good. I think they'll be even better on offense. I know you guys have talked about it on JCS and Wake Up Warchant. I mean, when you throw in all the guys returning, you throw in those two monsters coming in at tight end. Um, I think they can even increase the numbers offensively a little bit more. There's not too much higher to go because you're near the top now. But I think that low hanging fruit, that defensive side of the football, I think you can make huge strides. I think having all that depth, get those huge transfers to go in there, would love it coming back. I think he'll be better at linebacker position. Those are the stats that are going to go into that rush defense and some of those other key metrics there. And I think where Florida State has struggled, and I think that's going to be the difference between a team this team going on and competing for an ACC championship and maybe getting the playoffs or maybe being another 9-10 win team if they're still struggling in those areas.
Yeah, no doubt. And this returns to the offensive line question as well, Gene. When they played Florida and Oklahoma the last two
Hmm.
games, and I understand a bowl game is kind of a one-off, but you pair those two together and you look at the trenches and you say who won. You kind of have to
Yeah.
pause because at least when you're talking about Florida State's defensive line going against Oklahoma or Florida's offensive line, the Sooners and the Gators won those battles respectively. And that's with Oklahoma sitting multiple starters, guys going to the NFL
Yeah.
draft or not participating in the bowl. Those are two 500 football teams that went toe to toe with you in the trenches. So there's absolute room for improvement on both sides of the football when you get close to the football. I think for the defensive line's sake, though, Gene, you saw that a non-healthy Fabian Lovett, Robert Cooper wasn't 100%. There wasn't a whole lot behind him. And you're correct. There is now more depth this year. So you would expect improvement in both categories. NCAA defensive stats against the run, PFF grades against the run. FSU should improve there. Where else do you think they could improve beyond the interior of the defensive line? Is it do you go to offense first? Do you go to tackling? Is it coverage, pass rush? Where do you think FSU can improve again still in 2023, going from very good to elite or from below average to above average?
Well, you mentioned the tackling there. I mean, I think that's something to practice. And it's tough nowadays. It's almost all thud. You don't do any tackling to the ground like they used to back in the Mickey Andrews days. So I think that hurts a little bit. So I'm guessing tackling's not great in a lot of teams. But you watch, again, I hate to make the comparison, but you watch the Georgias and the Alabamas. They don't seem to have these issues. So that's through practice, man. They've got to maybe look at how they're handling tackle drills, things like that, because they have some guys there who should be able to make tackles a little bit better. They just have really struggled in that area. And it worries me too. A guy like Jamie Robinson, who was the eraser, it seems like a lot of times in that run defense is going to be out of there now. So they need a solution for there. Maybe through the portal, you got one more window. Maybe you can sign another stud safety somewhere, maybe another linebacker. Might be able to help you in that regard. So I think tackling, and you mentioned the offensive line, Tom. I think they've got guys coming in. I think we can see better performance in the trenches because, like you said, you can't depend every game for Jordan to save you and for you to out scheme the other team. Sometimes you need to win in those trenches, and
Yep.
we've talked about it, those goal lines and those really short down situations. It'd be nice if Florida State could actually out physical a team and get that tough yard instead of having to come up with some kind of gimmick. It seems like a lot of times to be able to score.
Yeah, you raise a good point, Gene. Just reflecting more, as you said, that Jordan bailing you out, that was the entirety of the Florida game. It was just he was Superman. And how many
Yeah.
sacks, potential sacks, did he avoid? Sometimes 3 and 4 on one play in order to get Florida State in something positive, or in some cases, first and goal at the one. You don't want to have to make him Superman, especially if you're trying to get from playoff caliber to national
Hmm.
championship caliber. Yeah, you do have to block it up even more. That's the fun stuff that we're going to be breaking down, not just when spring camp starts, but how about sooner, Gene? Because tackling is a function of position. Where are you on the field? If you're in position to make a play, you can make a play. That's going to be the charge of Florida State's new defensive backs coach, Patrick Surtain. You can expect his introductory press conference right here on Warchant TV. He meets the media on Wednesday, along with all the great coverage. A full rundown and article from our own Gene Williams on all these topics can be found on warchant.com. Head over there. You can see the special right now running through August 31st of this year. It's a great deal, and it's always free here on Warchant TV. So for Gene Williams, founder administrator of warchant.com, my name is Tom Lang. We hope you enjoyed the breakdown. And if you haven't already, throw us a like on the way out and send us a comment of what you thought, maybe some places FSU can improve underneath this video. We'll talk to you next time on Warchant TV.